How's it going, folks? My name is Hellbent and welcome to this introductory tutorial into programming with C. We have a lot to cover, so let's just jump into it. As the tutorials go forward, we're going to be covering a lot of topics very quickly, but if you have any questions, you can always leave comments down below. The first thing we're going to do is I should point out that I'm going to be using Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 Express Edition. It's a little bit old, but it's the one that I've used for many years, so I'm very comfortable with it. I'll probably upgrade later on as the tutorials go through, so if things look a little bit different on the screen to you than they do on mine, don't worry about it. It's just mostly cosmetic stuff. Most of the things that we're going to be covering are right at your fingertips. They'll be easy to find the same way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. To do that, I'm just going to go to File, and then New, and then New Project. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I select Windows 32 Console Application, and then I'm going to go ahead and give my project a name. My first program. Okay, apparently I used that before. My first program 2. Okay, and then you should get this page here, the Win32 Application Wizard. We're just going to hit Next, and on the next page we're going to make sure that Console Application is selected, and then we're going to select Empty Project, and then Finish. After that's done, we're going to create some source files. So if you don't have the Solution Explorer open like this, you can find it right here. Just click on this icon here or find the Solution Explorer. Maybe you have the same hotkey, and then that'll open up the ability to see this stuff here. We're going to create a new source file. We're going to right click on that and go to Add, New Item, and then we're going to click on C++ File. Down here we're going to give it a name. Doesn't really matter what it's called. You can call it pretty much anything you want, but at the end of it, make sure you put .c. Because if you don't, it's going to be a C++, and we're not working in C++. So make sure you put .c, and we are good to go. Once you're done that, just hit Add, and you should get this opened right up here. The first thing we're going to look at is making comments. Now, we're going to come back to comments later on, but comments are a way for us to actually leave notes to ourselves or other people that describe what the program is doing at any particular point. So if we have a particularly complicated function, maybe we'll leave some notes about what the function is doing, or other notes throughout the program that describe what's happening at any given point. At the beginning of a script, pardon me, I've been working in a different programming language for a little while, so if you hear me say script, I mean program. At the top of the program, you might also want to create a header or some kind of note that says basically who wrote it, when did you write it, when was your last edit, what were the updates you made to it, what does the program do, etc., etc., etc. So let's look at two ways that we can create comments. The first way is a single line, where we comment out a single line, and that is with 2 slashes, and I can write, this is a comment. The other way that we can create comments is by doing a slash followed by an asterisk, and then at the end of it, however many lines that we want to have commented out, we can do the reverse. And then everything in between these 2 lines will be commented. Now this is going to come in handy if you have a program where something's going on, maybe something's not working properly, or you want to make it the code a little bit cleaner, etc., etc. Perhaps rather than deleting your code that you're going to be replacing, you can comment it out. Then so let's say that this is in this area here, I have the code that I'm going to comment out, and above it I can write fresh code to try to replace this code, and I'll leave this here commented out until I know that the new code works. Once I know the new code works, perhaps then I can delete this, but I have this as a backup if I need to. Okay, so that's it for comments. Like I said, we'll come back to comments later on, but the next thing we're going to look at is including libraries. Now, there's a lot of functions that you need to use separate libraries in order to have the functionality, and the first one we're going to look at is the standard input and output library, and this allows us to use functions like printing to the screen or getting user input. So the way we include this is we just type pound and then include. Now it's important to note the case. This is very case sensitive. I've just spent the last 2 years working in a language that isn't case sensitive, so I'm sure I'm going to have a couple of times where I type it out wrong. I'm also not used to using semicolons anymore, so I'm sure once or twice I'm going to mess that up as well. So we have include, and then in between these greater than less than signs, we're going to include the library, or the header file for the library, which is stdio, or standard input output dot header. And what this is going to do is when we go to compile our program later on, it's going to grab the appropriate things from that library and include it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our main function. Now, the C program executes all from a main function, and inside of our main function we can call to other functions, we can call etc, etc, but everything happens from the main one outwards. Don't worry if you don't understand, it'll become clear as we go forward, but all we're going to do is we're going to create our main function. There's a couple of ways that we can do this. We're not going to be passing anything into our function, and we're not going to be passing anything out of it or returning anything out of it. So all we're going to do in this simple example is we're just going to type main followed by an open and close parentheses, and then we're going to have a open French brace or curly brace. And then we're going to go down a couple of lines and close that brace. So this is now, everything in here is now in our main function. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a little, we're going to print something out to a screen. So the way we print something out to the screen is all we have to do is, or the way that we're going to be using right now is we're just going to type out printf for print function, and then open and close parentheses followed by a semicolon. I'll get that out of the way right away so I don't forget. Now everything that we want to have printed out we're going to put in between quotes. And we're going to do the obligatory first lesson, the first program obligatory thing, which is to create a program that says hello world. So here's our program, and if we go to run this right now, so we're going to just save that and then we're going to run it. And what's going to happen is it's going to open up this window and then it's going to close it right away. Assuming we don't have any errors. Okay, so we've seen it, opened it, closed it right away. So what we need to do now in order for it to actually stay on the screen is we need to tell it that we want it to wait for somebody to enter a keystroke, any keystroke at all. So we're going to type in get ch, open and close parentheses followed by a semicolon. But in order to use this, as you can see, it's got this red squiggly line underneath it. In order for us to use this, we need to include another library. So what we're going to do up here is we're going to type in include, and then once again this followed by conio.h, and then close that off. So now you notice that this is no longer giving us that red squiggly line, meaning that we are okay to go. We'll compile it or we'll run it. And now you notice that the screen stays up. And it's waiting for us to actually hit any key for it to finish itself. So if I hit a key, boom, it's done. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of lines. And I'm going to show you how to actually clear the screen. of the whatever text that we have on it. So I'm going to create another line. Actually, there's probably a couple of things we can do. And I'll include, once again, I'll include this down here. So if I run this again, it'll give us hello world, and then it'll wait for me to enter a key. And then it's going to print more text, but it's on the same line. So how do we get this new text to go on to a new line? Or whatever. So the way we can make it so that we put that new text on its own line is we can use an escape character with n. So we will do /n, and now what that means is that we want to line break to the next line, and if we add multiple of it, we can do 3 lines, and now our next line of text, when it gets added, it'll have 3 lines before it. We could also, what we also could have done in this case is we could have had it at the beginning of this one. So now it's actually going to be 6 lines between the two of them. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So now it's broken it down, it's 6 lines below it. There's one more thing that we'll look at quickly in here before we move on, and that is using tab characters. So if I don't want this text to be right up against the left margin, what I can do is I can tab it over by using the escape tab, the tab character, which is /t, and now it'll be tabbed over. I think it's between 7 and 9 spaces. You can check it out for yourself. It's between 7 or 9 spaces. It's been a while since I actually counted out how many spaces it is. But like I said, we'll tab over, we'll have the hello world slightly off of the left hand margin, and we'll leave this one on the left hand margin. So you can see hello world is no longer sitting against the edge. We've tabbed it over, and if I press enter, the other one is against it. Okay, so that's out of the way. Let's go into the next topic, and that is actually clearing the screen when we're done. So as you can see, after we did this, both of those things stayed on the screen. But what if we have 10,000 lines that we're trying to print out, or if we're trying to create a menu, right? Perhaps we don't want this stuff here if our next screen is going to be a menu. So let's get rid of this stuff off of the screen. And the way we do that is by typing in here, system, and then open and close parentheses with CLS, or clear screen. But you'll notice that we have this red squiggly line again. So what we have to do now is we have to include another library, and the library we're going to include this time is the standard library. Okay, and now you'll notice that this system no longer has that red squiggly line, and if we run this, and what I'll actually do to show you that it's erasing it is I'm going to add another line down here, and I'm just gonna change it to last line. Alright, so we're gonna save this. We're just gonna run it. It's gonna do its own save. Okay, so we have our first line, we have our second line, and now it's gonna clear the screen and give us our last line up at the top again. Okay, so that is how we clear the screen. And now we'll move forward. The next thing we're gonna look at is one of the first data types, and the first data type we're going to look at for this is integers, which are whole numbers, so anything that doesn't have a decimal place in it. And the way we need to create every variable, so these are going to be variables. Every variable that we create, we have to initialize it before we use it. So up at the top of the program, up at the top here in main, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type out int, and then I'm going to create a variable. And I can create a name, virtually any kind of name I want, but I can't have any spaces in between it. And I also, there's certain characters that I can't use, but for the most part, simple names. So let's say I want to have a variable called user input. You'll notice that if I want to have a space in here, I have to use an underscore. Right? Now what I can do is I can give it a value right now. I can say that it equals 1, but what we're going to actually do is we're going to get the user, the person, you or me, to actually type in a value for that after. So we're going to leave that blank, and we're going to create another one as well. Actually, let's just do one for now. Let's just do one for now. Also, see, I've almost forgot, at the end of it, I also have to put a semicolon. So make sure you include that semicolon afterwards. So this is an integer, it's a variable of an integer type, which means I'm going to be using a whole number between like 0 and, or actually it can be negative numbers too, but a whole number between this number and that number. I'll have to actually look it up to see what the range is. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to prompt the user to actually type in an integer. So the way we do that is the same way as we printed out other things. So printf, I'm going to add my semicolon right away, and we're going to prompt the user. Let's have a couple of line breaks, get it closer to the center, and then we'll tab over a couple of times. Just so you know, if I was to actually add another line break here, it's actually going to completely get rid of the tabs that I had, so it'll be right back against the left margin again. So bear that in mind. We'll tab it over a bit and we'll just say please enter an integer. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to use the scan function to actually get the input. So what's going to happen is it's going to show that line and then it's going to wait for them to actually do an input. So we're going to type out scanf, open and close parentheses, followed by a semicolon at the end. And in here we're going to put, in between quotes, we're going to use the escape for, this is how we put our display variables in our text, or in our Windows console. So what we can have two options here. We can use either an I or a D. We'll just stick with I. I don't want to confuse you. So we're going to say that we're trying to scan an integer from that person, and over here we're going to put a comma and then an ampersand and the name that we're going to. So whatever they scan, whatever they type in, we're going to put that into what variable that we want. So we only have one variable right now, so we're going to put it in there. So we're going to do user input. So they're going to type something and that's going to get stored in the variable user input. Then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to clear the screen. And then we are going to print out what they typed. We'll give a couple line breaks, maybe a tab, and we'll say you entered, and now we want to display what they entered. And the way we do that is, once again, to display a variable, we need to put a % followed by the data type. So the type we're using is integer, so we're going to do an I. So they entered that. After this, after our closing quote, I'm going to put a comma and I'm going to say what the integer, what is associated with this integer here, which is our user input. And then to close it off, I'm going to add a semicolon. And then what I'm going to do is, because I don't want the screen to close immediately, I'm going to type in get ch, open and close parentheses with a semicolon. And there we go. We have enough to run our program. Please enter an integer. What I should have actually done is dropped it down to the next line after that, because it's going to look like, it's going to be right there. But I'm going to type in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to hit enter, and it says, oh, I used the, see, let me fix that. Like I said, I haven't used this in a very long time, so I don't want to give you the wrong way of doing it. But I'll fix this too. I'm gonna, after we ask for the integer, I'm gonna drop down a couple of lines, or one line, so it doesn't, so the thing isn't blinking right beside it. Please enter an integer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You entered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we can see that we can display what they entered, and we can store that into a variable. Now we're going to step this up a little bit, and we're going to do a little bit of math. So let's get rid of, we'll keep this one here, we'll keep this one here, except we're going to rename this. We're going to rename this variable to user input 1. We need to make sure that we have it right here as user input 1 where we scan it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to put this down near the bottom of my program. And up here, what I'm going to do now is, as soon as we scan that, it gets added to the buffer. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear that from the buffer, so that way we don't have any problems when we're trying to enter new stuff in. So the way I do that is I just type in flush. And then open and close with stdin. Flush the standard input output. Oh, the in. There we go. So it's flush, 2 F's, flush, stdin. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to prompt them to enter another integer. And I'm just going to save a little bit of time, I'm going to copy this stuff here, and I'm going to edit it a little bit. So please enter another integer, and we're going to come up here and we're going to create another integer. User input 2. Now the way that I have this here is very readable. You can read this very easily. But if we had 100 variables, 200 variables, 300 variables, this is going to create a 300 lines that it's going to make it very hard for us to navigate our program. So what we can do instead is, if we have variables that are of the same data type, what we can do is we can actually include them on the same line. So what I can do is I can actually take this user input 2, and I'm going to, for the moment, I'm going to get rid of this semicolon, and if I want to add another variable on the same line, I just add a comma. And then I can paste in that second variable, and at the end, as soon as I've finished adding the last variable, I can add my semicolon. Okay, so this, right now, this makes it harder for it to read, but if you have hundreds and hundreds of variables, this will actually make it easier to read things. And once you can also, of course, add a little bit of space, so that way it makes it a little bit easier. So we have our 2 integer data types, and now we're going to actually create one last one, which we are going to call sum. Actually, we'll call it total. So I'm going to add a comma to add another variable of the integer data type, and I'm going to call it total. So I've created another variable called total, and once again, all these variables, I haven't assigned a value to them. I'm going to let the program do that for me. Okay, so we have asking for the second integer, which we're going to be looking for user input 2. We're going to clear the screen, and now that we have both of those values, what we're going to do is we're going to add them together. So we're going to say that total equals user input 1 plus user input 2, semicolon, to finish it off. And last, we are going to print out another statement. Printf, quotes, semicolon at the end just to get it out of the way. So this time we're going to say that you entered. We're going to display with the first number that they used, which by adding a percent mark followed by an I, and then we're going to add and percent followed by an I. No, that's a bad. The total of the first integer that we added plus the second integer we added equals the third integer we have. And then after our closing quote, we're going to put a comma followed by the variable that is associated with the first one that we're referencing here, which is user input 1. Then we're going to put a comma and followed by the second variable that we're going to be referencing right here. User input 2 followed by the last integer that we're referencing here. If we were to reverse these orders, then it would show them there plus there and there. So like their position in here, how we want them to be displayed here has to be displayed in here the same way. Okay, and I think we have enough, so let's go ahead and run this. Please enter an integer, so the first one I'll do is 125. Enter another integer, I'll do 75, and we should get a value of 200. So the total of 125 plus 75 equals 200. Okay, I think that concludes this tutorial. Come back soon when I get the next one up, where we're going to start stepping things up and go on to a lot more. Anyways, have a good evening. My name is Hellbent. Peace out.